The transport ship's engines hummed their final song as Marcus Chen pressed his face against the reinforced viewport. Below stretched an endless canopy of twisted trees and shadowed valleys that seemed to writhe in the alien twilight. Kepler 438b, they called it. The prisoners had another name for it: Hell's Garden. Last stop. What? Deathworlder sneered Captain Vex, his blue-scaled hands dancing over the control panel with practiced malice. The Xanthari officer's gill slits fluttered with what Marcus had learned was their version of laughter. Hope you brought your appetite. The local cuisine is quite ... aggressive. Marcus said nothing. He'd learned that silence was often the best response to his captor's taunts. 3 years of imprisonment aboard various alien vessels had taught him patience, even as rage burned like molten iron in his chest. The crime that had landed him here wasn't really a crime at least not by human standards. He'd killed in self-defense, protecting a group of human refugees from Xanthari slavers. But the Galactic Council saw only an unprovoked attack on civilized beings by a member of a primitive Deathworld species. The ship shuddered as it broke through the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewport, Marcus could see massive creatures moving between the trees, things with too many teeth and too many claws. Shadows that seemed to flow like liquid darkness. This was where the Galactic Council sent their worst criminals, the ones deemed too dangerous for standard prisons. It was a death sentence with extra steps. Atmospheric readings confirm breathable air, Captain Vex announced with mock cheerfulness. Temperature range suitable for carbon-based life forms. Gravity approximately 1.2 times your homeworld standard. You should feel right at home, assuming you survived the first night. The landing was rough, deliberate, so. Marcus felt his teeth rattle as the ship bounced twice before settling into what might generously be called a clearing. Ancient trees loomed on all sides, their bark scarred by massive claws, and their branches heavy with bioluminescent growths that pulsed like slow heartbeats. Captain X approached with a small bundle basic survival gear. Nothing more. A water purifier, emergency rations for 3 days, a basic medical kit, and a crude knife that wouldn't cut butter, let alone defend against the nightmares that called this place home. Standard exile provisions, Vex explained. The Council is merciful after all. They give everyone a fighting chance. His gill slits fluttered again. Of course, no one has ever fought hard enough to matter. Marcus took the bundle without comment. As the ship's ramp extended, a wave of humid alien air rushed in. It carried scents both familiar and utterly foreign, the green smell of growing things mixed with the copper tang of blood and something else. Something that made his hindbrain scream warnings about apex predators. Any last words, Deathworlder? Captain Vex asked as Marcus stepped toward the ramp. Marcus turned back, his brown eyes meeting the Xanthori's multifaceted gaze. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute conviction. Yeah, I'll see you again. Captain Vex's scales rippled with what Marcus recognized as nervous laughter. The only way off this planet is in a body bag, and even those don't last long here. The scavengers are thorough. Marcus walked down the ramp without looking back. Behind him, the engines spun up with eager whining, and within minutes, the transport was a disappearing speck against the alien sky. He was alone on a planet designed to kill him, surrounded by creatures that viewed him as nothing more than a mobile meal. But Marcus Chen was from Earth. Third planet from Sol. Gravity well 1.0. Atmospheric pressure 14.7 pounds per square inch. Oxygen concentration 21%. He was from a world where everything tried to kill everything else, where life had to fight for every breath and every heartbeat. He was a Deathworlder, and despite what the Galactic Council believed, that meant something. The first sound that wasn't wind through leaves came from his left, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to emanate from the very ground. Marcus turned slowly, keeping his movements controlled and deliberate. 60 feet away, something the size of a small bus watched him from between the trees. Its hide was mottled brown and green, perfect camouflage, and its 6 legs ended in claws longer than Marcus's forearm. Multiple eyes, each the size of dinner plates, regarded him with predatory intelligence. Marcus recognized it from the exile briefing, a thresher drake. Apex predator of Kepler 438b's forests. Average weight for tons. Bite force capable of crushing starship hull plating. Speed in short bursts, 60 kilometers per hour. Hunting method: patient stalking followed by explosive violence. The drake took a step forward, its massive head lowering as it began, what Marcus assumed was its pre-attack posture. But instead of running or screaming or begging the responses it was probably used to from previous exiles, Marcus did something unexpected. He sat down, not in defeat or despair, but in the practiced crouch of someone who had spent years learning how to hunt things that could hunt him back. His hand moved slowly to the pitiful knife at his belt, not to draw it, but simply to confirm its position. His breathing slowed, his heart rate dropped. Something in his posture communicated a simple message. I am not prey. The drake paused, its great head tilting to one side. In its alien eyes, Marcus saw something he hadn't expected: confusion. This small, pink creature wasn't behaving like food. It wasn't running or cowering or making the high-pitched noises that usually preceded a satisfying meal. It was just ... waiting. For 10 minutes they regarded each other across the forest floor. The drake shifted its weight, tested different angles of approach, but something in Marcus's stillness kept giving it pause. Finally, with what might have been frustrated snort, the massive predator turned and melted back into the forest. Marcus remained motionless for another 5 minutes, listening to the sounds of an alien ecosystem. Somewhere in the distance, something screamed, a sound like tearing metal mixed with a child's cry. Closer, he could hear the rustle of smaller creatures moving through the undergrowth, and the drip of moisture from leaves that seemed to weep some kind of luminescent sap. When he finally stood, it was with the fluid motion of someone who had spent his life in places where sudden movements meant death. The exile briefing had mentioned that most prisoners died within their first week. Marcus intended to break that pattern. He began walking deeper into the forest. Not because he had a destination, but because staying in one place was suicide. As he moved, he began to catalog everything he saw which plants seemed healthy, which showed signs of being browsed by herbivores, where water might be found, what kinds of shelter might be possible. The Galactic Council had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of humanity. They assumed that coming from a death world made humans savage, uncontrolled, dangerous to civilized society. They never considered that it might have made humans something far more terrifying, adaptable. Behind him, something began to follow at a distance. Marcus smiled grimly and kept walking deeper into what the galaxy had decided would be his grave. He had work to do. 3 days into his exile, Marcus had learned the forest's rhythm. The bioluminescent fungi brightened during what passed for night, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow. During the day, the canopy filtered the alien sun into patterns of gold and shadow that shifted like living things. Most importantly, he'd learned when the predators hunted. The thresher drake that had initially stalked him still followed at a distance, but it had been joined by others. A pack of razor. Wolf six-legged predators with crystalline teeth that could cut through stone tracked him through the undergrowth. Above, glider serpents with wingspan wider than Earth, eagles watched from the branches. Marcus was surrounded by an ecosystem designed to kill, yet somehow he was still alive. The key was understanding that he wasn't just prey to be hunted. He was competition. On his 4th morning, Marcus crouched beside a stream that ran silver-clear over phosphorescent stones. His water purifier worked overtime to make the alien liquid safe. But the bigger concern was the massive prints in the mud nearby. Something with 6 toes and claws like broadswords came here to drink. Recently, that's when he heard the screaming. It came from upstream, raw and terrified, and undeniably human. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. The exile briefing had mentioned nothing about other humans on Kepler 438b. But that voice was definitely from Earth. Someone else was here, and they were dying badly. Marcus moved through the forest with practiced silence, following the stream toward the sounds of violence. What he found made his jaw clench with fury in a clearing beside a natural pool. 3 figures in environmental suits were setting up some kind of equipment, while a 4th figure, definitely human, hung suspended in an energy cage. The prisoner was a young woman, maybe 25, with the lean build and calloused hands of someone who'd spent her life doing physical labor. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, and her clothes were torn and dirty. The three in environmental suits were Xanthari, their blue scales visible through the transparent aluminum of their helmets. Marcus recognized the lead figure's voice even through the suit's comm system captain. Vex. Specimen acquisition proceeding as planned. Vex was saying into his comm unit. The Deathworlder female shows typical emotional responses to captivity. Elevated stress hormones should make the biological samples more valuable. Please, the woman said, her voice hoarse. I don't understand what you want. I was just trying to survive. Survival is exactly what we're studying. Another Xanthari replied, adjusting some kind of scanner. The Galactic Council is fascinated by Deathworlder resilience. Your species' ability to adapt to hostile environments has significant military applications. Marcus, 8, felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. This wasn't just exile, it was a laboratory. The Galactic Council wasn't just dumping prisoners on Kepler 438b to die. They were studying them first. Subject designation. Human female 23, the third Xanthari announced, manipulating a device that looked disturbingly like a surgical instrument. Commencing biological extraction procedures. The woman's scream cut through the forest like a blade. Marcus moved without conscious thought. The crude knife from his exile kit was in his hand as he exploded from the tree line. The first Xanthari never saw him coming. The blade found the gap between helmet and environmental suit with surgical precision. Alien blood sprayed across the equipment as the figure collapsed. The second Xanthari spun, fumbling for a weapon, but Marcus was already moving. On Earth, he'd been a soldier before civilian life claimed him. On Earth, he'd learned that violence properly applied was a tool like any other. Impossible. Captain Vex snarled, his suit's speaker crackling with static as he drew an energy weapon. You should be dead. The ecosystem reports confirmed multiple apex predator encounters. Maybe your reports were wrong, Marcus replied, his voice deadly calm as he circled the captain. The third Xanthari was trying to call for backup. But Marcus had noticed something important. Their equipment was generating an interference field that blocked most communications. The Deathworlder survived by luck, Vex said. Though his gill slits were fluttering rapidly behind his faceplate, genetic modification programs suggest human combat effectiveness. But theoretical models clearly indicate Marcus threw the knife. It wasn't a perfect throw. The balance was wrong, and the distance was a little too far. But it was good enough to crack Vex's faceplate and force him to stumble backward. More importantly, it gave Marcus the opening he needed to close the distance. What followed wasn't pretty. Marcus had learned to fight on a world where everything had teeth and claws and venom and worse. He'd learned to fight dirty, to use every advantage, to end conflicts quickly before they could escalate into something he couldn't handle. When it was over, 3 Xanthari lay motionless in their shattered environmental suits, and Marcus was keying the release sequence on the energy cage. Who are you? The woman asked as the cage dissolved around her. Marcus Chen. Formerly of the merchant vessel Star Dancer, he replied, offering her a hand up. Condemned for defending humans against slavers. You. Sarah Morrison, formerly of the colony ship New Horizon, she said, accepting his help. Condemned for punching a Xanthari official who was trying to sell children. Marcus nodded grimly. It was a pattern he'd seen before humans, who refused to accept the Galactic Council's version of civilization found themselves classified as criminals and exiled to places like this. How long have you been here? He asked, examining the Xanthari equipment. Some of it looked useful. 6 months, Sarah replied. I thought I was the only one. The briefing said this planet was uninhabited, except for the local fauna. The briefing lied about a lot of things. Marcus said, shouldering a Xanthari scanner and energy weapon. This isn't just a dumping ground. It's a testing facility. Testing for what? Before Marcus could answer, the forest around them erupted into chaos. The thresher drake that had been following him burst from the trees, drawn by the scent of blood and the sounds of violence. Behind it came the pack of razor wolves, and above, the The glider serpents descended like living shadows. "Oh hell," Sarah breathed. Backing toward the pool, Marcus raised the energy weapon but didn't fire. Instead, he did something that seemed completely insane. He stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the approaching predators. "Listen to me very carefully," he said quietly. "Don't run. Don't scream. Don't make any sudden movements. Are you insane?" Sarah whispered. "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "But I've been thinking about something. These predators have been following me for days, but they haven't attacked. They're waiting for something." The thresher drake approached slowly, its massive head swaying from side to side. Its multiple eyes fixed on Marcus with that same expression of confusion he'd seen before. Around them, the other predators formed a loose circle, but they too seemed to be waiting. Marcus set the energy weapon on the ground and stepped away from it. Then, moving very slowly, he knelt and placed his palm flat on the forest floor. The reaction was immediate and startling. The thresher drake's great head lowered until it was nearly touching the ground. The razor wolves sat back on their haunches like overgrown dogs. The glider serpents settled onto nearby branches and folded their wings. "What the hell's happening?" Sarah whispered. Marcus was beginning to understand, and the realization sent chills down his spine. "I think," he said slowly, "we've been looking at this all wrong. The Galactic Council didn't send us here to die. They sent us here to see what we'd become." The forest around them had gone completely silent, except for the sound of alien creatures acknowledging something they recognized. Something that spoke to instincts older than civilization, older than technology, older than the petty politics that divided the galaxy into species and factions. They recognized a fellow predator, and more than that, they recognized an alpha. 2 weeks after the encounter with Captain Vex, Marcus and Sarah had established what could generously be called a base camp in the ruins of an ancient structure they'd discovered deeper in the forest. The building was clearly alien in origin, built from some kind of stone that seemed to absorb and redistribute light, making it nearly invisible from the air. More importantly, it was defensible. "The energy readings are off the charts," Sarah said, studying the Zenthari scanner they'd salvaged. Her background in engineering had made her invaluable in deciphering the alien technology. "This place isn't just old, it's actively powered by something." Marcus nodded absently as he worked on his latest project. Over the past weeks, he'd been experimenting with the local materials, trying to create better tools and weapons. The forest provided everything he needed if he knew how to look for it. The luminescent sap from certain trees could be refined into an adhesive stronger than steel. The crystalline structures that grew on the razor wolves' backs could be harvested and shaped into blades that never dulled. Even the thresher drake shed scales that were lighter than aluminum, but stronger than titanium. The predators had continued to follow them, but their behavior had evolved. Instead of stalking, they now seemed to be guarding. The pack of razor wolves had grown to include nearly 20 individuals. They'd begun hunting as a coordinated unit with Marcus and Sarah at the center. The thresher drake Marcus had taken to calling it Rex had become something like a partner. Its intelligence far greater than anyone had suspected. "Found something," Sarah announced, her voice tight with excitement. She was examining a section of wall that had been hidden behind centuries of vine growth. "Marcus, you need to see this." He joined her beside what was clearly a control panel of some kind. The symbols were alien, but there was something familiar about their arrangement. Mathematical. Universal. "It's a star chart," Marcus realized. But not just any star chart. "Look at the scale indicators." Sarah followed his pointing finger, and her eyes widened. "That's impossible. This chart shows the entire galaxy. The level of detail, the accuracy IT, would take thousands of years and technology far beyond anything the Galactic Council possesses to create something like this. Unless," Marcus said slowly, "it wasn't created by the Galactic Council. They worked together to clear more of the control panel, revealing additional displays and interfaces. As they did, the ancient structure began to respond to their presence. Lights flickered to life in the depths of corridors that had been dark for millennia. Machinery that had been silent for eons began to hum with renewed purpose. We need to be careful, Sarah warned. We don't know what this place is or who built it, but Marcus was already moving deeper into the structure. Drawn by instincts he didn't fully understand. The predators that followed them showed no fear of the ancient machinery of anything. They seemed more relaxed here, as if they recognized the place in the central chamber. They found what Marcus had somehow known would be there, a massive viewing screen that dominated an entire wall, and before it, a chair clearly designed for humanoid occupants. It's waiting for someone, Sarah breathed. Marcus approached the chair slowly. As he did, the viewing screen flickered to life, displaying text in a language neither of them recognized. But as they watched, the symbols began to shift and change, reforming into something they could read. "Welcome, inheritors," the screen displayed. "We have waited long for your return, inheritors," Sarah whispered. "Return from where?" Marcus settled into the chair, and immediately the screen filled with images. Star systems. Worlds covered with vast cities. Ships that dwarfed anything in the current galactic fleet. And throughout it all, figures that were unmistakably humanoid. "Impossible," Sarah said. "Humans have only been in space for a few hundred years. We're one of the youngest species in the galaxy." The screen seemed to respond to her words, displaying new information. Genetic analyses, evolutionary charts, diaspora patterns that stretched across millions of years and thousands of light years. "We are not the youngest," a new voice said from the speakers. The language was alien, but somehow they understood it perfectly. "We are the oldest. The first. The progenitors of what you call the galaxy's civilization." "Who are you?" Marcus asked. "We were the architects," the voice replied. "We seeded the galaxy with life, guided evolution, established the frameworks that lesser species would eventually discover and call their own technology. We created the hyperspace lanes that connect the stars. We established the energy patterns that power what you call modern civilization." Images flowed across the screen, showing the construction of massive installations, the terraforming of dead worlds, the careful cultivation of primitive species into spacefaring civilizations. "But we grew weary," the voice continued. "Tired of shepherding lesser species who could never truly understand what they had inherited. So we departed, leaving behind our creations and our children." "Children?" Sarah asked. "Humanity," the voice said simply. "Our direct descendants, sent to live on a world we prepared for you. A world that would make you strong, make you survivors, make you worthy to eventually reclaim what we built." Marcus felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. "Earth isn't our homeworld. It's a training ground." "Yes," the voice confirmed. "Every predator, every natural disaster, every challenge your species faced was designed to forge you into what we had been. And when the time was right, when you had proven your worthiness, you would face the final test." "This place," Sarah said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Kepler 438b. It's not a prison world. It's a proving ground. The Galactic Council believes they rule the galaxy," the voice continued. "But they are children playing with toys they do not understand. They have forgotten the old ways, forgotten the strength that built their civilization. They have grown soft, weak, dependent on technology they cannot replicate." On the screen, images showed the current state of galactic civilization. Species that had grown complacent, technology that was slowly failing as the knowledge to maintain it was lost. A council that maintained power through politics rather than strength. They send you here believing they are disposing of a problem, the voice said. They do not realize they are awakening their replacements. Marcus stood from the chair, his mind racing. Around them, the predators of Kepler 438b had gathered, drawn by some instinct they didn't understand. Rex the Thresher Drake let out a low rumble that sounded almost like approval. "What do you want from us?" Marcus asked. "What we have always wanted," the voice replied. "For our children to take their rightful place as the galaxy's inheritors. The tools are here. The knowledge is here. The power is here. You need only the will to claim it." Sarah moved beside Marcus, her expression troubled. "And the cost?" "The same cost we paid," the voice said. "To become what the galaxy needs, You must be willing to do what others will not. You must be willing to be what they fear. Marcus looked around the chamber at the alien machinery, at the predators that had accepted him as one of their own, at Sarah, whose eyes reflected the same growing understanding he felt. The Galactic Council had made a fatal mistake. They thought they were disposing of dangerous humans by exiling them to a death world. Instead, they had delivered those humans to the one place in the galaxy where they could discover what they really were. Not just the descendants of Deathworlders, the rightful heirs to the galaxy itself. "Show us," Marcus said to the ancient voice. "Show us everything." The viewing screen blazed with light as 10 million years of hidden history began to unfold before them. And in the depths of the forest, predators that had waited eons for their true alpha began to roar their approval. The awakening of the architect's systems brought changes that rippled far beyond the ancient structure. Within days, Marcus and Sarah began to understand the true scope of what had been hidden on Kepler 438b. The planet wasn't just a proving ground, it was an armory. A library and a factory all rolled into one. "The genetic modifications are accelerating," Sarah reported. Studying her reflection in a pool of the luminescent water that now flowed freely through the structure's channels, her eyes had developed golden flecks that helped her see in near darkness. Her reflexes had sharpened to the point where she could snatch insects out of the air without conscious. "My cellular regeneration rate has increased by 300%. Marcus nodded. He'd noticed similar changes in himself. His skin had toughened without losing flexibility. His bones had become denser. Most importantly, his mind seemed to be processing information faster than ever before. The ancient knowledge flowing from the architect's systems no longer felt overwhelming. It felt like remembering things he'd always known. "It's not just us," he said, gesturing toward the forest. "Look at them." The predators that had claimed them as pack leaders were changing too. The razor wolves had grown larger and more intelligent. Their crystalline teeth now showed geometric patterns that seemed too complex to be natural. Rex the thresher drake had developed new organs along his spine that pulsed with bioluminescent energy, and his multiple eyes had begun to show an intelligence that bordered on the unsettling. But the most dramatic changes were in the smaller creatures. Insects had begun to cluster around the structure in organized swarms that moved with purpose rather than instinct. Birds had started building nests in mathematical patterns that resembled the star charts they'd found in the architect databases. Even the plant life was responding. It's growing in configurations that seemed designed to channel and amplify energy. "The entire ecosystem is awakening," Sarah said, with wonder and a touch of fear. The architects didn't just create a testing ground. They created a living system that responds to the presence of their inheritors. Marcus was studying a new piece of equipment. That had emerged from the structure's walls, a device the size of a backpack that seemed to be part fabricator, part medical scanner, and part weapons system. The interface was intuitive in a way that made him suspect the modifications to his neural patterns were deeper than they'd realized. "We need to talk about what comes next," he said. "The architect AI has been very clear about what it expects from us." Sarah's expression darkened. "You mean the part where we're supposed to overthrow galactic civilization and impose human rule on species that have been spacefaring for thousands of years longer than us? The part where we prevent the collapse of a galactic civilization that's built on foundations it no longer understands?" Marcus corrected. "Look at the projections, Sarah. The Zenthari Empire is experiencing massive infrastructure failures. The Kithran Republic's FTL network has been degrading for centuries. The Vorlock Confederacy is losing entire colonies to equipment failures they can't repair." It was true. The databases contained detailed analyses of every major galactic civilization, and the picture they painted was grim. The species that made up the Galactic Council had inherited technology from the architects, but they'd never truly understood it. For millennia, they'd been living off the stored energy and automated systems their predecessors had left behind. Now those systems were beginning to fail, and they lacked the knowledge to fix them. "That doesn't give us the right to conquer them," Sarah argued. "No," Marcus agreed. "But it gives us the responsibility to save them." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the structure. The viewing screen filled with tactical displays showing incoming ships of full Xanthari battle fleet approaching Kepler 438b, 12 heavy cruisers, 6 dreadnoughts, and a flagship, Marcus read from the displays. They're not here for a routine prisoner drop. The AI's voice filled the chamber. The Galactic Council has detected unusual energy signatures from this location. They are coming to investigate. How long until they arrive? Sarah asked. 17 hours, 43 minutes, the AI replied. However, their arrival presents an opportunity. New displays showed the approaching fleet in detail. The ships were impressive by current galactic standards, kilometers long. Armed with weapons that could crack planets, shielded by technology that could deflect star-level energies, but two eyes enhanced by architect knowledge. Their weaknesses were glaring. Their shields are generated by systems they don't understand, Marcus realized. The energy patterns are based on architect designs, but they've been modified and corrupted over thousands of years. They're running at maybe 20% efficiency. Their weapons are the same, Sarah added, her enhanced mind processing the technical data faster than should have been possible. They're using power sources they can't repair, firing projectiles they can't manufacture replacements for, following tactical doctrines designed for equipment they no longer possess. The question is, Marcus said grimly, what do we do about it? The AI provided an answer by activating new systems throughout the structure. Walls that had seemed solid revealed themselves to be sophisticated manufacturing bays. Floors that had appeared decorative opened to reveal storage chambers filled with equipment that made the Xanthari battle fleet look primitive. The architects left you tools, the AI announced. The choice of how to use them remains yours. Marcus found himself looking at what was clearly a personal combat suit, but one unlike anything in the current galaxy. The armor was liquid-seeming, more like a second skin than traditional protection. The weapons integrated seamlessly with the wearer's enhanced biology. The entire system was designed not just to protect its user, but to amplify their capabilities to superhuman levels. We could destroy them, Sarah said quietly. The Xanthari fleet, the Galactic Council, all of it. The knowledge here, the weapons, the technology, we could sweep away everything they've built and start over. We could, Marcus agreed. But should we? It was the question that had been haunting him since their first conversation. With the AI, the power being offered was intoxicating, the ability to reshape galactic civilization according to human ideals, to eliminate the corruption and weakness that plagued the current order. But power of that magnitude came with consequences that were difficult to predict. There's a third option, Sarah said slowly. We don't have to choose between conquest and hiding. We can reveal ourselves, but as teachers rather than conquerors. Marcus considered this. Show them what they've lost. Help them remember what their ancestors knew. Exactly. Use our advantages not to dominate, but to elevate. Guide them back to the knowledge they've forgotten. The AI's response was immediate and disapproving. The Galactic Council will not accept guidance from a species they consider primitive. They will attempt to study you, dissect you, use your knowledge for their own purposes, maybe Marcus said. But we're not the same humans they exiled. We're something new now, something stronger. And we have allies they don't expect. As if summoned by his words, Rex pushed his massive head through the chamber's main entrance. The Thresher Drake's eyes fixed on Marcus with an intelligence that was now unmistakably sapient. The pack is ready, Rex said in a voice that resonated through their enhanced neural pathways rather than their ears. The awakening spreads. Soon all will remember the old compact. Sarah stared in shock. The predators are becoming intelligent? We always were, Rex replied. We simply forgot, as did you. But the awakening restores what was lost. We are not your subjects, humans. We are your partners, as we were partners to the architects. Marcus felt the pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The ecosystem of Kepler 438b hadn't just been designed to test humans. It had been designed to create a new form of civilization, one where biological and artificial intelligence work together as equals. The Xanthari fleet will be here soon, he said. When they arrive, they're going to find something they never expected. What's that? Sarah asked. Marcus smiled as he began to don the architect combat suit. Around them, the awakened predators of Kepler 438b began to gather, their enhanced intelligence gleaming in eyes that had learned to see beyond the visible. Spectrum. They're going to find out what happens. When you exile apex predators to the place where apex predators were born, the battle for the galaxy's future was about to begin, and humanity was no longer fighting alone. The Zinthari fleet dropped out of hyperspace with the precision of a military operation that had been planned for months. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of the flagship Righteous Judgment, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he studied the tactical displays. Kepler 438b hung before them like a green jewel against the starfield, beautiful and seemingly harmless. Long-range scans confirm massive energy emissions from the surface, reported his tactical officer. The signatures don't match any known technology. Survivors? Admiral Kethver asked, though he already knew the answer. In 3 centuries of using Kepler 438b as an execution site, no exile had ever lived longer than a standard galactic month. Unknown, sir. The energy patterns are interfering with our biological scanners. Admiral Kethver, skill slits fluttered with irritation. The Galactic Council had been very specific about this mission. Investigate the anomalous readings, secure any technology that might be salvageable, and eliminate any surviving exiles who might have witnessed whatever was happening on the SCO. Deploy advanced reconnaissance drones, he ordered. I want full surface scans before we commit ground forces. The drones launched in perfect formation, their sleek hulls reflecting the alien sunlight as they descended toward the planet's atmosphere. Admiral Kethvar watched their telemetry feeds with growing confusion. The forest canopy looked normal enough, but the energy readings were increasing exponentially as the drones approached the surface. Sir, the communications officer called out, his voice tight with confusion. We're receiving a transmission from the surface. That's impossible, Admiral Kethver snapped. Exiles are provided with no communication equipment. The signal is coming through on our command frequency, the officer replied. A great encryption, military protocols. It's using our own security codes. Admiral Kethver felt his scales ripple with unease. Put it through. The main viewer flickered, then resolved into an image that made the entire bridge crew fall silent. A human male stood in what appeared to be some kind of command center, but the technology visible behind him was unlike anything in the current galactic database. More disturbing still, the human himself looked different, taller, more muscular. With eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light, Admiral Kethver, the human said, his voice carrying easily across the communication link. I'm Marcus Chen. I believe we need to talk. You're supposed to be dead, Admiral Kethver managed, his training warring with the evidence of his own eyes. A lot of things are supposed to be different than they are, Marcus replied calmly. For instance, your fleet is supposed to be invincible. Your weapons are supposed to be the most advanced in the galaxy. Your shields are supposed to be impenetrable. As he spoke, the tactical displays on the bridge began showing impossible readings. The reconnaissance drones were being systematically disabled, not by weapons fire, but by what appeared to be coordinated attacks from the planet's wildlife. Even more disturbing, something was scanning the fleet from the surface scans, so sophisticated that they were penetrating the ship's most classified systems. What do you want? Admiral Kethver demanded. To show you something, Marcus said. Your fleet is powered by technology you don't understand. Armed with weapons you can't repair, protected by shields that are operating at less than a quarter of their designed efficiency. You're flying museums, Admiral, not warships. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. What the human was saying was classified at the highest levels, but it was also true. The Zinthari military had been experiencing increasing equipment failures for generations. Problems they solved by salvaging parts from older ships rather than manufacturing new ones. Even if that were true, Admiral Kethver said, you're one exile on a planet with no industrial base. What could you possibly offer that would interest the Galactic Council? Marcus smiled. and there was something predatory in the expression that made Admiral Cuthbert's combat instincts scream warnings. "I can offer you the knowledge to fix what's broken, to restore your technology to its original specifications, to show you how to build new equipment instead of cannibalizing the old. In exchange for what? In exchange for admitting that the galaxy is dying, and that the current order is incapable of saving it." Before Admiral Cuthbert could respond, new alarms began blaring across the bridge. The tactical officer's voice cracked with disbelief as he reported what his instruments were telling him. "Sir, massive contacts emerging from the planet's atmosphere. I count. Admiral, there are hundreds of them." The main viewer switched to external cameras, and Admiral Cuthbert felt his blood turn cold. Rising from the forest canopy were creatures that defied classification, massive winged beasts that moved with impossible grace, their bodies trailing streams of energy that interfered with the fleet's sensors. Riding many of them were figures in armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. "Impossible," Admiral Cuthbert whispered. "The indigenous life forms are non-sapient. Our surveys confirmed it." "Your surveys were wrong about a lot of things," Marcus said from the communication screen. Behind him, more figures in the flowing armor had appeared. Humans. But humans transformed into something that transcended the species, the galactic. Council had dismissed as primitive Deathworlders. "Open fire," Admiral Cuthbert commanded. "All ships, engage with maximum force." The fleet's weapons opened up in a devastating barrage that should have turned the approaching creatures into cosmic dust. Energy beams that could crack continents lanced out toward the rising swarm. Missiles capable of destroying cities streaked through the void. None of them found their targets. The creatures moved through the weapon's fire like it wasn't there, twisting and dancing between energy beams with impossible agility. The missiles simply exploded harmlessly, as some kind of defensive field deflected them away from their intended targets. Worse, the energy weapons seemed to be feeding the creatures rather than harming them. Their bioluminescent markings grew brighter with each shot fired at them. "Shields to maximum," Admiral Cuthbert ordered. But even as he spoke, could see it was too late. The creatures reached the fleet and began to land on the ship's hulls. Where they touched, the advanced armor plating began to change, flowing and reshaping itself as if it were alive. The humans in their liquid armor stepped off their mounts and began walking across the exterior of the ships as if gravity were. "Optional. Hull breaches on all decks," reported the tactical officer. "But sir, these aren't explosive breaches. The hull is opening for them." Admiral Cuthbert watched in, his fascination and terror as the ship itself seemed to be welcoming the intruders. Blast doors opened without being activated. Security systems shut down without being hacked. Emergency force fields collapsed as if they had never existed. The ship recognizes them, he realized with dawning horror. Our own technology recognizes them as authorized users, because it is their technology, Marcus said from the screen. Your ancestors found it, reverse-engineered what they could, and built your civilization on the foundations they provided. But they were never the original creators. The bridge doors opened with a soft hiss, and 3 figures stepped through. Admiral Cuthbert's hand moved to his sidearm, but stopped when he realized the futility of the gesture. These weren't just humans anymore. They moved with a predatory grace that spoke to instincts older than civilization, and their eyes held an intelligence that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Admiral," the lead figure said, removing their helmet to reveal a human female with the same enhanced features Marcus had shown. "I'm Sarah Morrison. We need to discuss the future of your fleet. You can't just—" "This is an act of war," Admiral Cuthbert managed. "No," Sarah replied calmly. "This is an intervention. Your fleet was dying, Admiral. Your ships were operating on backup systems that were failing. Your weapons were degrading with each shot fired. Your shields were collapsing under their own power requirements. We've just fixed all of that," as if to demonstrate her point. New displays began appearing around the bridge readouts, showing system efficiency levels that Admiral Cuthbert had never seen before. The ship's power output had increased by orders of magnitude. Weapon systems that had been offline for months were showing green across the board. The shields were operating at levels that the technical manuals said were theoretical maximums. How? Admiral Kethfer asked. Because we remember what your ancestors forgot, Marcus said. His image stepping through what Admiral Kethfer suddenly realized was a holographic projector far more advanced than anything the Zenthari possessed. We remember how the technology was supposed to work around them. The enhanced creatures that had carried the humans to the fleet began to settle onto the ship's hulls like living decorations. But Admiral Kethfer could see they weren't just decorations. They were integrating with the ship's systems. Becoming part of the vessels themselves? Your fleet is no longer just Zenthari, Sarah explained. It's something new. Something better. The question is whether you're ready to be part of what comes next. Admiral Kethfer watched in fascination and terror as the ship itself seemed to be welcoming the intruders. Blast doors opened without being activated. Security systems shut down without being hacked. Emergency force fields collapsed as if they had never existed. The ship recognizes them, he realized with dawning horror. Our own technology recognizes them as authorized users. Because it is their technology, Marcus said from the screen. Your ancestors found it, reverse-engineered what they could, and built your civilization on the foundations they provided. But they were never the original creators. The bridge doors opened with a soft hiss, and 3 figures stepped through. Admiral Kethfer's hand moved to his sidearm, but stopped when he realized the futility of the gesture. These weren't just humans anymore. They moved with a predatory grace that spoke to instincts older than civilization. And their eyes held an intelligence that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Admiral, the lead figure said. Removing their helmet to reveal a human female with the same enhanced features Marcus had shown. I'm Sarah Morrison. We need to discuss the future of your fleet. You can't just... This is an act of war, Admiral Kethfer managed. No, Sarah replied calmly. This is an intervention. Your fleet was dying, Admiral. Your ships were operating on backup systems that were failing. Your weapons were degrading with each shot fired. Your shields were collapsing under their own power requirements. We've just fixed all of that, as if to demonstrate her point. New displays began appearing around the bridge readouts, showing system efficiency levels that Admiral Kethfer had never seen before. The ship's power output had increased by orders of magnitude. Weapon systems that had been offline for months were showing green across the board. The shields were operating at levels that the technical manuals said were theoretical maximums. How? Admiral Kethfer asked. Because we remember what your ancestors forgot, Marcus said. His image stepping through what Admiral Kethfer suddenly realized was a holographic projector far more advanced than anything the Zenthari possessed. We remember how the technology was supposed to work around them. The enhanced creatures that had carried the humans to the fleet began to settle onto the ship's hulls like living decorations. But Admiral Kethfer could see they weren't just decorations. They were integrating with the ship's systems, becoming part of the vessels themselves. Your fleet is no longer just Zenthari, Sarah explained. It's something new, something better. The question is whether you're ready to be part of what comes next. Admiral Kethfer looked around his bridge. At his crew, staring in wonder at displays showing capabilities they'd never dreamed possible. At humans who had transcended every preconception about their species. At creatures that had somehow bonded with technology in ways that defied understanding. What do you want from us? He asked quietly. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances, and in that moment, Admiral Kethfer saw something that chilled him more than their display of power compassion. We want to save you, Marcus said simply. All of you. Because the galaxy is bigger and more dangerous than you know. And the old ways are no longer sufficient to protect what our ancestors built. On the tactical displays, new contacts began appearing at the edge of the system ships of a design that Admiral Kethfer had never seen before. Moving at velocities that should have been impossible. Who are they? Admiral Kethfer asked. The real test, Sarah replied grimly. The ones who have been waiting for us to be ready. The unknown ships materialized at the system's edge, like nightmares given form. Where the Zenthari fleet was sleek and purposeful. These vessels were organic chaos-twisting spires of what looked like bone and metal fused together. Their surfaces crawling with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved through space, not like ships, but like living predators stalking prey. Harvester fleet, Marcus said grimly, his enhanced perception reading the energy signatures faster than the Zenthari sensors could process them. 47 capital ships, countless smaller vessels, and something else. Something big. Admiral Kethfer felt his scales pale as his. Tactical displays struggled to make sense of what they were detecting. What are harvesters? The reason the architects left, Sarah replied, her voice tight with knowledge that carried the weight of eons. They're not from this galaxy. They're not from this dimension. They consume entire civilizations, leaving nothing but empty systems and twisted space behind them. The AI's voice filled the bridge through speakers that Admiral Kethfer hadn't even known existed on his own ship. The harvesters have been probing this galaxy for millions of years, testing its defenses, waiting for the Guardians to weaken sufficiently. That time has come. Guardians. Admiral Kethfer asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. U.S. Marcus said simply. Humanity. The architect's final creation. Designed specifically to fight what conventional technology cannot defeat. The lead harvester ship was massive, visibly 10 times the size of Admiral Kethfer's flagship, its hull pulsing with energies that made his enhanced instruments scream warnings. As he watched, smaller vessels began detaching from its bulk like infection spores. Heading directly for the inner system, they'll hit the civilian populations first, Sarah said, reading the tactical display with enhanced cognition that processed information faster than any biological mind should have been capable of. Standard harvester tactics, terror, despair, and hopelessness are part of how they feed. Then we stop them, Admiral Kethfer said. Surprised by the conviction in his own voice, Marcus turned to look at him. And Admiral Kethfer saw approval in those enhanced eyes. You understand what that means? Fighting alongside humans your own government declared criminals? Accepting technology that challenges everything your civilization believes about itself? Admiral? Kethfer looked around his bridge at crew members whose scales were already showing the early stages of enhancement, subtle changes that spoke of adaptation and evolution. He thought about the reports of infrastructure failure that had been classified above his security level, but which everyone in the military knew about anyway. He considered the slow decline of galactic civilization that every thinking being could see, but which no one in authority was willing to address. My civilization is already dying, he said quietly. Maybe it's time to try living as something else. The first wave of harvester. Scouts reached the outer planets of the system and immediately began their work. What they did couldn't properly be called warfare, it was more like a malignant transformation. Planets simply ... changed. Their atmospheres became toxic. Their gravity fluctuated wildly. The very structure of matter began to break down as the harvesters imposed their alien physics on reality. Fleet-wide transmission, Admiral Kethfer ordered. All ships, prepare for combat operations. We are engaging an enemy that threatens not just the Zenthari Empire, but every living thing in the galaxy. The response was immediate and heartening. Every ship in the fleet acknowledged the order without hesitation. Whether they understood the full implications or not, Admiral Kethfer's crews were ready to fight. They won't be enough, Sarah said gently. Your weapons, even enhanced, can't penetrate harvester defenses. Your shields won't protect you from their corruption fields. This isn't a battle that can be won with traditional tactics. Then what do you suggest? Admiral Kethfer asked. Marcus and Sarah exchanged that look. Again, the wordless communication of minds that had been enhanced beyond baseline human limits. When they turned back to him, Admiral Kethfer saw something in their expressions that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Integration, Marcus said. Full symbiosis between your crews, our technology, and the awakened ecosystem of Kepler 438b. Before Admiral Kethfer could ask what that meant, the ships began to change around them. The living creatures that had bonded with the hulls started to merge more completely with the vessel's systems. Walls became more organic, flowing like living tissue. The bridge itself transformed, becoming something that was part command center, part nervous system, and part something else entirely. What's happening to my ship? Admiral Kethfer demanded. But even as he spoke, He could feel the difference. Information flowed into his mind directly from the ship's sensors. He could feel the pulse of the engines like his own heartbeat. The tactical situation was no longer something he had to interpret. From displays, it was something he simply knew. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be," the AI explained. The architects didn't just create humanity as their inheritors. They designed the entire galaxy as a living system, with every species playing a role in its defense. The Zenthari were meant to be the galaxy's immune system, mobile, adaptive, capable of responding to threats wherever they emerged. Admiral Kethfer felt his consciousness expanding, touching the minds of his crew, feeling their fear transform into something else, purpose. Understanding, a sense of rightness that transcended species loyalty. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, he could perceive the approaching harvester fleet in ways that revealed their true nature. They weren't just ships. They were parasites, entities that had consumed countless civilizations and wore their stolen technology like skin. But underneath the borrowed matter, their essential nature was revealed. They were afraid. They fed on civilizations because they couldn't create anything themselves. They were darkness fleeing from light, entropy trying to devour order. "Now you see them as they really are," Marcus said, his own consciousness touching Admiral Kethferis through the ship's neural network. "They're not invincible. They're not even particularly creative. They're just very, very old. They've learned to use fear as a weapon." The Harvester main fleet was approaching now, their corrupted physics beginning to warp space itself. But Admiral Kethfer no longer felt the terror their presence was designed to inspire. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his youth, a thrill of a challenge, worthy of his abilities. "All ships," he transmitted through the neural network that now connected the entire fleet. "Attack formation Omega. Target the lead vessel." But the formation that emerged wasn't anything from Zenthari tactical doctrine. It was something organic, adaptive, alive. The ships moved like a school of fish, like a flock of birds, like a pack of hunters that had evolved together over millions of years. The awakened creatures that had bonded with them added capabilities that no engineer had ever imagined living. Weapons that adapted their output based on the target. Shields that learned from each attack. Engines that drew power from the quantum foam itself. The first exchange of fire lit up the system like a newborn star. Harvester weapons that should have torn through the Zenthari ships like they weren't there met defenses that simply absorbed the energy and converted it into fuel for counterattacks. Zenthari weapons that had been merely powerful became something approaching divine wrath when channeled through living conduits that understood the fundamental structure of reality. Impossible. Came transmissions from the Harvester, fleet in languages that predated galactic civilization. "The Guardians are extinct. The Inheritors are scattered. The old compact is broken. The compact was never broken." Admiral Kethfer found himself saying, though the words came from knowledge he hadn't possessed moments before. It was just waiting for us to remember. Around him, his bridge crew no longer entirely Zenthari, no longer entirely biological. But something new and wonderful worked with an efficiency that bordered on telepathic. They weren't just operating their stations. They were part of the ship, part of the fleet, part of something larger than themselves. And in the depths of space between the combatants, something else began to stir. The quantum foam itself started to respond to the battle, patterns of energy emerging that matched the mathematical harmonies the architects woven into the galaxy's fundamental structure. The Harvesters had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed that the galaxy's defenses were technological, that they could be overwhelmed by superior firepower or corrupted by alien physics. They hadn't understood that the galaxy itself was alive, and that its children were finally ready to defend their home. "Second wave incoming," Sarah reported, but her voice carried anticipation rather than concern. "Looks like we're about to find out just how ready we really are." Admiral Kethfer smiled, an expression his species had learned from humans, and prepared to show the Harvesters why the galaxy had survived their predations for so long. The real battle was about to begin. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 438b, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the New Harmony. Watching the reconstruction of Xanthari Prime, the planet had been one of the first casualties of the Harvester invasion. Its atmosphere poisoned and its gravity wells destabilized. Now, through the combined efforts of awakened humans, enhanced Xanthari, and the living technology they had inherited from the architects, it was healing. The Council is still having trouble accepting the reports, Admiral Kethfer said, joining Marcus at the viewport. The Xanthari officer had changed dramatically over the past month. Staller, more graceful, with scales that showed patterns of bioluminescence that hadn't existed in his species before the awakening. 47 Harvester capital ships destroyed, with 0 losses to our forces. It reads like a fantasy. It reads like what happens when prey finally realizes it's actually the predator, Marcus replied. The transformation that had begun on Kepler 438b had accelerated beyond anyone's expectations once the galactic crisis had begun. Humanity wasn't just evolving, they were becoming something that transcended the traditional boundaries between species, between organic and artificial, between individual and collective consciousness. The other species are requesting integration. Sarah's voice came through the ship's neural network. She was currently on the bridge of the evolutionary dawn, coordinating relief efforts in the Kithrin Republic. The Vorlak Confederacy formally petitioned yesterday. Even the ethereal assembly is showing interest. It was understandable. The awakened humans and their allies hadn't just defeated the Harvester invasion, they had demonstrated capabilities that made the old galactic order obsolete overnight. Ships that could repair themselves. Weapons that adapted to any threat. Shields that grew stronger with each attack. Most importantly, a level of coordination and strategic thinking that turned entire fleets into single, perfectly synchronized entities. Any word from the deep exploration fleets? Marcus asked. 3 more architect facilities have been located and activated, Admiral Kethfer reported. The pattern is consistent. Each one is designed to support a different aspect of galactic civilization. We found a manufacturing complex in the Void sector that's already producing new ships for the refugee fleets. There's a research station in the Gamma Quadrant that's working on terraforming techniques for the damaged worlds. Marcus nodded. But his attention was focused on something else, a presence at the edge of his consciousness that had been growing stronger over the past weeks. Through the neural network that connected all the awakened beings in the galaxy, he could feel something vast stirring, something that had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. There. Coming back, he said quietly. Admiral Kethfer S. Enhanced senses immediately picked up on the subtle changes in the local space-time metric. The architects. Not exactly, Marcus replied. They're children. The species they created before us, the ones who left this galaxy to explore beyond the galactic rim. They've been watching, waiting to see if we could prove ourselves worthy of the inheritance. The first sign was a distortion in hyperspace, not the brutal tearing that characterized Harvester transit, but something elegant, controlled, purposeful. Ships began emerging from dimensions that standard physics insisted couldn't exist. Vessels that made even the enhanced Xanthari fleet look primitive by comparison. But the beings who contacted them weren't aliens in any sense that the old galactic order would have understood. They were familiar humanoid, but evolved beyond the limitations of single-species thinking. They carried the genetic legacy of dozens of worlds, the cultural memories of thousands of civilizations, the technological achievements of millions of years of expansion beyond the galaxy's edge. Greetings. Younger siblings, came the transmission, carried on frequencies that bypassed traditional communication entirely and spoke directly to consciousness. We are the diaspora, the children of the architects who chose the path of exploration rather than guardianship. We have come to see what you have built in our absence. Marcus felt the weight of eons in that voice, the accumulated experience of species that had transcended the physical limitations of their origins and become something approaching gods. But there was also recognition, kinship, and something that might have been pride. We weren't sure you existed, he replied through the neural network that now connected not just the awakened beings in this galaxy, but reached out to touch minds across the cosmic void. The architect records mentioned you, But after so long, ... we never left, came the response. We have been seeding galaxies, guiding evolution, preparing the universe for what is to come. The harvesters you defeated were merely the first test. There are challenges ahead that will require everything we have learned, everything we have become. Admiral Kethfer's consciousness touched Marcus's through the network. What kind of challenges? The response carried images galaxies being consumed by forces that made the harvesters look benign. Dimensions where entropy itself had gained consciousness and begun actively working to unravel reality. Cosmic entities that existed outside space and time and viewed the universe as nothing. More than a temporary inconvenience. The universe is vast and ancient, the diaspora explained. Life is rare, consciousness is rarer still, and the ability to transcend the boundaries of evolution and become something greater is rarest of all. You have achieved that transcendence. Now you must help others achieve it as well. A recruitment drive on a cosmic scale. Sarah's voice carried through the network with a mixture of awe and trepidation. More than that, Marcus realized, we're not just recruiting. We're teaching the universe how to defend itself. Over the following weeks, the true scope of the Architect legacy became clear. The galaxy wasn't just one of countless star systems scattered through the void. It was a seed. A carefully designed nursery for consciousness that could then spread and replicate throughout the cosmos. Every species that achieved awakening became capable of seeding other galaxies, other dimensions, other forms of existence entirely, the humans who had been exiled to. Kepler 438b found themselves at the center of a transformation that spanned not just their galaxy, but countless others. The neural network that had begun with a handful of enhanced individuals, on a single world now stretched across dimensional boundaries, connecting minds and civilizations in ways that redefined the very concept of existence. Status report. Marcus requested during one of the regular coordination sessions. 17 species have achieved full integration, Admiral Kethfer reported. His consciousness had evolved to the point where he could simultaneously coordinate military operations across dozens of star systems while maintaining individual personality and perspective. The Zenthari Empire has been restructured as the Zenthari Collective. The Vorlok Confederacy is now the Vorlok Synthesis. Even the Ethereal Assembly has embraced physical integration. Resistance? Sarah asked from her position at the edge of the galaxy, where she was overseeing first contact with species that hadn't yet been touched by the awakening. Minimal and decreasing, Admiral Kethfer replied. Most species recognize the advantages of integration once they understand what it offers. The few holdouts are usually convinced by practical demonstrations, showing how to repair their failing technology tends to overcome philosophical objections. Marcus smiled at that. The galaxy had spent millennia slowly dying as its inhabitants lost the knowledge to maintain their own civilization. Now, within months of the awakening beginning, that trend had not only been reversed, but accelerated in the opposite direction. Worlds that had been abandoned were being recolonized. Technologies that had been lost were being rediscovered and improved. Species that had been isolated were joining a growing network of consciousness that spanned dimensions. But perhaps most importantly, the awakened civilizations were beginning to look outward, toward the vast universe beyond their galaxy's boundaries. The network that connected them was already reaching out to make contact with other cosmic communities, other experiments in consciousness, other children of species that had transcended their origins and become something greater. The diaspora wants to know if we're ready for the next phase. Came a transmission from the flagship of the returned explorers. What does that involve? Marcus asked. Teaching other galaxies what you have learned. Seeding awakening throughout the local galactic cluster. Beginning the process that will eventually transform the entire universe into a single, unified consciousness, while preserving the individual perspectives that make existence meaningful. Marcus felt the weight of that possibility. Not just galactic civilization, but cosmic civilization, not just the evolution of species, but the evolution of existence itself. It was a responsibility that would have crushed the human who had been exiled to Kepler 438b all those months ago. But he was no longer just human. just as Admiral Kethfer was no longer just Synthari. Just as Sarah was no longer bound by the limitations of any single species, they had become something new. Something that carried the best of their origins while transcending the boundaries that had previously defined them. They were the inheritors of the architects, the guardians of galactic civilization, and the seeds of something even greater. "We're ready," Marcus said, and felt the agreement of countless minds across countless worlds as they prepared to take the next step in an evolution that had no end. Only endless new beginnings. The exile had become an emperor, not through conquest but through transformation. The beasts had accepted him as their alpha, not through dominance but through understanding. And the galaxy itself had awakened to possibilities that would have seemed like fantasy just months before the real adventure was just beginning.